Welcome back to Get Mac. We're going to continue to learn about aggregate demand and aggregate supply models. Okay, so we're going to continue here pretty much where we stopped from last time, which is, hey, we talked about the aggregate demand, about the components of the aggregate demand, and we say, hey, how can we discuss now why the curve is shaped this way? Why, as the aggregate price level goes up, we tend to demand less of final goods and services produced within the U.S. So let's understand the law of demand into given a macroeconomic perspective of this model. So to do that, we need to first understand what wealth is, right? So wealth is all assets accumulated of an individual. Okay, so it could be, now we're not only talking about currency in terms of cash, checking accounts, we're also talking about stocks, bonds, artwork, gold that you have stored with the bank, all your bank accounts. So everything that you can pretty much, that you own that can be counted as part of wealth in terms of dollars. Okay, they can be sold and then expressed that way. So the wealth effect here is talk about that inflation impact, right? As the aggregate price level in the economy goes up, right? That means that now the price of final goods in the economy is going up. Remember the assumption, everything else besides the two variables included in the graphs are being held constant. So in this case, your income is being held constant, right? So given that the price level goes up, but your income stays constant, you know, your purchasing power, the purchasing power of your income now goes down, which means, hey, as the aggregate price level goes up, I will demand less goods, final goods and services. Okay, because I can't buy as much because of the purchasing power of my money, of my wealth, which went down. Okay, so that's the first idea. So here's a big question: does an increase in the aggregate price level impact the level of interest rates in the economy? So now we're moving along to the second part, which is the interest rate effect. Okay, so in other words, how can we connect the market vulnerable funds with GDP? Okay, let's further understand that. So there's a couple of steps that we can follow to understand that better. Okay, but overall, the idea here is that, hey, if there's a change in the aggregate price level, that means that now for you to buy, let's say you don't agree with the first factor, that, hey, I'm not going to buy less goods and services idea. I'm just going to save less, and I'm going to save less so I can buy the same amount of goods and services. So the wealth effect could be incorrect. Okay, but then how do you respond to this one? If you decide to then save less, then hey, that's going to be an impact on the supply of funds in an economy, right? Which leads us to the market for loanable funds. Okay, so now if people are not buying less, they decide to buy the same amount of goods and services despite the purchasing power going down of their wealth, they're going to save less then to be able to do so. If they save less, then the supply of savings in the market for loanable funds goes down, right? And as you can see here, and if that's the case, we know that the level of investment in the economy is now going down and the interest rate is going up. Okay, so this rise in interest rates lead to lower investment, which, as you know, investment is part of the GDP equation as well, which is part of the aggregate demand equation. So now we know that because of the interest rate effect, given that the aggregate price level goes up, we tend to have less investment in the economy because of the higher interest rate that we can expect from this. Okay, if that's the case, we know that the aggregate demand then would leads to lower levels of demand at that point. Okay, so even though consumption is not being impacted, in this case, investment is being impacted. Okay, besides that, we're also going to look into the trade impact, which is the third one of this three that we're going to look into. Because this is the idea, hey, what about the international trade? We have talked about a closed economy, but if the price of goods and services change here, wouldn't that impact what I buy in terms of imports for the US? Yes. All right, so the idea here is that change in domestic aggregate price levels, so GDP deflator going up, okay, would decrease the quantity of demanded domestic goods abroad as well. So not only, hey, we're disincentivized to spend consumption here or to lower investment, people from abroad don't want to buy more stuff from the US either, right? So, hey, are we buying stuff from abroad? Could be too, but especially this impact that from now on, people are not going to buy as many US goods and services, right? Why? Well, because now they know it's more expensive to buy that good here relative to home. So they may choose to buy more goods and services at home as well. Okay, so higher US price levels leads people from other countries to buy less US goods and services, which you know is going to count as negative because of the exports, right? Which would decrease aggregate demand in this case and explain the negative slope of the aggregate demand curve as well. Okay, so please let me know if you have any questions about this, and we can definitely dive into more on the virtual class. But here's a big summary of the 3 effects that we discussed, and please make sure you read them and see if you're understanding them. So that's why they're there. Okay, now the next question is, okay, I understand that it's downward, so the slope of the aggregate demand is down, it's negative. Okay, I understand the law of demand in this model for this macroeconomic perspective, right? But why is it so steep? Like, why do we see, right? What I mean by steep, why is the aggregate demand curve so steep instead of being more flat? Okay, let's understand that too. We're not just drawing curves here just to look cool, right? There's economic theory behind those theories, and that's the cool part. If we can understand them and we can understand the limitations of these models, then hey, what we can interpret them and add to them and help the economy to understand itself even more and help policymakers. So that's the idea behind economic research. Okay, so why so steep? So that here's that, think about the relationship of the 2 variables being expressed. There's real GDP, there's the price level, right? So this is saying that, hey, if we were at Y1 and we move to Y2, let's see how those two axes would respond. So here we can see that, hey, it's very steep because larger changes in the price level leads to lower changes in GDP. So GDP, despite aggregate demand responding to change in the price level, it doesn't respond that much. That's what it's not as sensitive. So in other words, all those things that we talked about so far, all those effects, they're important, but they're having a small impact in the aggregate demand of an economy. Okay, so that's the idea for that one. So given that we know now the aggregate demand, the aggregate supply, and the potential GDP, or in the other names that we know, the aggregate demand, the short-run aggregate supply, or the long-run aggregate supply, right? How can we then find the equilibrium point in this model? As you can expect, the equilibrium point is going to be where the aggregate demand and the short-run aggregate supply intercept. That's always going to be an equilibrium, but the most efficient equilibrium where we want to be will be where the 3 curves intersect. Okay, so let's analyze this step by step here. All right, so in this case, let's look at the situation. In this situation, I would ask you guys, hey, where's the equilibrium here? Is there an equilibrium point? And yes, there is, right? There is a point where the economy is being represented right now, and it's an equilibrium between the aggregate supply, the short-run aggregate supply, and the aggregate demand. So yeah, there's an equilibrium. Now, is that where we want to be? Is that the most efficient equilibrium? That's the question, right? And you can see here that based on the previous videos, you'd say, no, Eddie, that's not the most efficient one because there's a GDP gap that is negative. Okay, so it's not the most efficient. So there's a way to lead an economy to better output. Okay, so that's the idea here. We're going to be able to then understand now how can we shift aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and potential GDP, given that we have different policies. Okay, so we're going to understand how to shift those curves now, given that we know what's the goal, which is to achieve the ultimate equilibrium, which would be a point where all those 3 curves intersect. So it looks something like this: aggregate demand, short-run aggregate supply, and the potential GDP. Oh, there we go. And this would be that ultimate equilibrium where all 3 intersect. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, so let's understand the shifts of the supply. So the 2 shifts that we're going to talk about the supply is going to be productivity growth and input prices, right? So here we're looking to an analysis where when the short-run supply shifts to the right, increases, right, it would lead to a greater quantity of real GDP being produced. And if it shifts to the left, then we're going to say that there's a decrease, a lower quantity of real GDP being produced. Okay, and the factors that are going to be influenced this are going to be the 2 that I just mentioned. So let's start with productivity. Why? Because in my view, it's the most important, and hopefully it'll be clear to you why. Okay, so remember, one thing that we talked about is that, hey, there's 2 curves of the aggregate supply, and if we can also incentivize the potential GDP curve to grow as well, that would be extremely nice for the economy, because we're increasing our level of production, efficient level of production in the long run. Okay, so productivity here, just remember, it's how much output can be produced given a quantity of labor. Okay, so for example, how many pizzas a worker can do per hour. Okay, just to give a quick example. So over time, though, the big question is, how would productivity influence the aggregate supply curves? Does it influence one or both? Right? The idea here is, remember that, hey, is this change permanent? If this change is permanent, it will also impact the long run aggregate supply, the potential GDP curve. Okay, so that's the idea to think about this here, is that how would this happen? Well, if there's an increasing productivity, how? Well, a new technology came about that now you can produce a lot faster and safe, right? Now we have internet that somehow is even faster than what it is right now, that you click and everything already opens, right? So there's new technological improvements that could occur that could lead us to higher potential GDP. People could get more knowledgeable. People can go to school, right? People don't lose their intelligence after they go to college, right? They stay smart. We know how college impact individuals in a positive way in terms of how they impact society. So those are all factors of productivity that would matter here, right? And since we know that, as you can see, those are permanent, we know that they're not only going to shift to the right and cause an increase in the short run aggregate supply, but also in the long run aggregate supply, or a work also called potential GDP. Okay. So long run aggregate supply 1, and this is long run aggregate supply 2. Okay, so as you can see, that's how we would update this model to account for increases in productivity. Okay, so once again, we're just doing everything that we did before in the model for demand and supply, but in the aggregate level now. Okay, Eddie, what do you mean? Well, interpret the shifts the same way. Why do we shift to the right? Simple, because at that point, imagine that we are at the first one, which is that E1 right here. Okay, if there's an increase in productivity, then at every price level, we would be able to produce more. Why? Because people are more productive, and that's why we shift that curve to the right. Okay, so that's the idea here, and let me know if you guys are not following the shifts, please. I would love to discuss this more in the virtual class as well. Okay, so the question is then, how quickly would the long run aggregate supply and the short run aggregate supply shift given a shift in productivity? Okay, that would depend on a lot of other factors as well. So for example, the catch-up effect that we talked about a long time ago, right? So how quick can a country grow? Does it have the institution and the environment to grow fast, right? Also the level of human capital of workers, which can determine how fast they can adjust to changes in technological advancements, right? So the given technological innovations, how would the workers adapt to it? And if they're more knowledgeable, they can adapt faster as well. So there's a lot to consider here, okay? The last one in terms of aggregate supply shifts that we're gonna talk about is changes in input prices. Okay, so remember here, changes in input prices here are held constant because we're modeling in the y-axis the GDP deflator. Okay, so given there's an increase in the price of inputs, for example, the price of energy or of gas goes up, right? Then we know now that you're gonna be paying more for the cost of production, the average cost of production, right? But once again, the price may not change, or will it? How do you shift to adjust that? Okay, so given they expect a lower margin of profit, would the supply react? Yes, they would. If you want to produce more when the marginal profit is higher, when the marginal profit is lower, you're disincentivized to produce that much. You're not benefiting as much from producing the same amount of goods and services. Okay, so increases in input prices discourages production in this model, as it has in our previous model as well when looking to a single market before. Okay, so how to account for that graphically, right? In this case, imagine there's a change of input prices, and as you can expect, that would, if there's an increase in input prices, it would decrease production. Why? Same analysis here. If we're at E1, and that's where was the initial equilibrium, if now input prices go up, then we know that at the same price level, I would be able to produce less, right? Because it costs more to produce, right? So I know I would decrease, the production would go down at every price level, okay? And you would see that would shift the short run aggregate supply. Now, would that shift the long run aggregate supply? Are changes in input prices permanent? Oh, right, we know those fluctuate all the time. We've seen energy prices and how volatile those are, food as well, and other inputs, maybe they're not as volatile, but those changes in input prices, they're not permanent. They could be maybe a specific situation, but usually, generally, they're not. So whenever we think about input prices for this class and for the purpose of this model, they're not going to impact the long run aggregate supply. Okay, just the short run aggregate supply. Very important. Okay, so please take a moment and try to solve this question. And I'm going to come back to the next video to solve it with you guys and further discuss the rest of this chapter. Okay.